Hello and welcome to episode number 65 of the Rollo and Slappy Show. Today is Monday, November 13th, 2017. I am Rollo McFlugel, and with me is Slappy Jones 2, and we are both at McFlugel.com. The show notes page for this episode is McFlugel.com/65. You'll be able to find links about things we're talking about, as well as ways to follow us on social media and to otherwise keep up with us. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Slappy, and he's going to introduce our episode topic.
Thank you, Rollo, and thanks again, everyone, for listening. This weekend, I was out raking my leaves, which where my house is, I get plenty of them. So the nice thing is I have a lot of time to listen to some podcasts, catch up on some things that I've missed over the last couple of weeks, just because there's only so much time in the day. And I was listening to the Rubin Report. Dave Rubin does a pretty good job. He gets a lot of good guests on with good, solid interviews. It's worth listening to usually. And a couple weeks ago, I think it was the November 3rd episode. I could be wrong on that, but it was maybe a week or two ago. He had Jordan Peterson on. Jordan Peterson is a clinical psychologist or psychiatrist. Psychologist? Do you know what it is?
Nope.
Okay, well, he's one of them. And he's a brilliant guy. I actually recommend listening to his podcast, which is also brilliant, helps me out in so many ways. Very knowledgeable, very well-read, knows Alexander Solzhenitsyn's stuff and Carl Jung and a whole bunch of them. He's really spot on with helping you through your day and letting you know that life is tough and there's ways to get through it. He's really great. But toward the end of this episode on the Rubin Report, he was asked a question and I didn't really like his response. So that's going to be the topic of this episode. So to get it started, I'm going to read the question that was asked to Jordan Peterson. It was by one of the listeners of the Rubin Report, Dave Rubin's show. Was one of the listeners got to send in questions. And so I'm going to read it and then I'll pass it over to Rollo for what he thinks of the question. Then we'll go from there. So this is Dave Rubin talking, quote, "Hi, Jordan Peterson. I believe there's a growing number of ANCAPs, free market anarchists, that are trying to influence society. I would like to know your opinions on them and how should we feel, and how should we keep them from thrusting us into chaos," end quote. Rollo, what do you think of the question, one, to begin with, before we go into Peterson's answer?
Well, I think we found someone more delusional than us about caring about anarchy, because, I mean, we're really at a point where anyone should be worried about anarchists not throwing us into chaos, but just having any sort of control over anything. I mean,
any influence on anything?
even if we, increased our numbers by a factor of 10 over the last year, well, we went from 10 to 100. And that's
right.
not,
I
think the movement's growing and I think that's great, but I mean, it's kind of fun. And then just thrusting us into chaos. It just shows that he doesn't have any idea of what we are or what we believe. So it's kind of
fun. Well, thrusting us, yeah, and it's like thrusting us into chaos as compared to what we're in right now,
right?
Where there's wars all over the place, people in jail. Like, what's chaos? How do you define chaos?
I don't know, but so I guess war is peace. Up is down.
Yeah, I don't know. Thrusting us into chaos. It's funny. We have a group of people demanding money from you and threatening you with imprisonment if you don't pay it, and that's not chaos, but living in a voluntary society would be chaos, according to this guy. So obviously the guy asking the question either doesn't understand anarcho-capitalism or is just being a jerk. I don't know. Because if you do not understand anarchy or the thought and the theories and the philosophy behind it, I could see why you would say it's chaos. But I just think you should look into it more instead of assuming that a group of people wants to thrust us into chaos. Just like I think Rollo would agree, when you talk to a real communist, someone who understands the theory behind it, their plan isn't to make your life hell. That's not what they want. They think it's going to be good. So in order to argue against them, you can't just say you're going to throw us into chaos. At least that's what I think. So
I mean, it's probably a good rule of thumb to try to not insult the people you're trying to learn what they think.
Or
Maybe.
yeah, and then
I mean,
well, right, and but the problem with this question here is that he doesn't want to learn because he's just already has his conclusion without learning. So,
and
you know,
and we didn't include it in the transcript on the show notes page or read it here, but and you can hear it if you listen to the Rubin Report episode. But David Rubin did add the comment right after that. He goes, "Oh, he did editorialize this a little bit." So
he did say that, yeah. I mean, he pointed it out.
Right.
So anyway, I'm going to read some of. We'll start Peterson's answer and have some discussion about it. So Jordan Peterson says, "Quote: Well, you can't get rid of government because government is just an expression of the necessity for groups of people to reach a consensus about how they're going to behave. There's no getting rid of that. Family has a government. If it doesn't, it has unspoken rules, and there's a ritual. So if there's no government, it's ritual. But families are actually better when some of the governing principles are articulated. To get the proper place usually means to balance a number of competing forces. It isn't like, well, no government and everything will be okay. It's like, no, sorry, that isn't that simple. And nothing is that simple. And that's why I'm not a fan of ideologues. It's like ideologues have the same answer to every question. It's like, well, that's the same as not thinking. Generally, it turns out that things are very, very complicated and you have to take them apart in detail, and then you have to solve a small part of the problem. And that's hard. It's like everything is like fixing a military helicopter. There's a lot of parts and you don't understand most of them, and you'll make it worse if you don't know what you're doing. And so those movements like anarchists or progressives, it's like, no, it's too complicated, end quote. I do want to add all those likes that were in there. That was what he said. So if that was a little confusing, I apologize. No, I'm just saying when he says it flows better because it's him talking. And
right. I was thinking the same thing. And as I was transcribing this, I took out a few, words here and there that didn't actually add anything. And I was tempted to take out the likes and everything. I was like, I don't want to,
So we'll just put a sick at the end of that. So I apologize that I didn't read it as clearly as he said it, because when he's talking, but it is what he said.
As I've learned doing this a few times, it's not the first time I've transcribed something. It's tough because it's weird. I mean, I can't imagine someone trying to transcribe what I say. It would,
of course,
be an absolute.
No, I wasn't
mess.
saying that as an insult to Jordan Peterson. He's very clearly when he talks. It's but I'm reading it and I'm trying, to not make it sound bad. But anyway,
you're reading.
Let's go back to the.
You're reading what I tried to transcribe from him. So it's like 3 degrees of communicate, like hearing, writing, and then reading. So it's.
Anyway, if you go get the episode and listen to it, we'll put the timestamp in there. But you can listen to exactly what he says.
I thought that was the only problem with what we had with what he said, was that he said like a few too many times. So I don't know.
Yes,
what else
so moving on.
Plan.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll catch you next week. All right. So let's go back to the beginning of his answer where he says, well, you can't get rid of government because government is just an expression of the necessity for groups of people to reach a consensus about how they're going to behave. Is that how you really define government?
No. I mean, that would be like me saying, well, you have 3 noses. And your response would be, what? I have 3 noses? Yeah. The one kind of in the middle of your face, between and below your eyes, and the 2 on the side of your head that you can you kind of hear things with. Like what, my ears? No, like, well, no, I mean, I'm gonna just define them as noses too. That's kind of silly,
right? Because that's not what government is,
right? I mean, that's the most important. A very important thing is if you're gonna, critique someone, at least use their definitions. I remember Adam Kokesh said it very well. I think it was when he came to Philadelphia to speak, and someone asked a question like, well, what if we had like systems of voluntary governments where, you only paid what you got out of it and they didn't force you to pay taxes and everything. And he goes, we have names for those sorts of things. They're called businesses. Don't call that a government. A government is something that puts a gun to your head. So right. I think it's important to
monopoly on force in a certain geographic area, right? I mean,
right. So it's, I mean, to say that to kind of make that analogy or say that, you as the father of your children is proportional to Donald Trump and his relationship to you, I think it's absurd. Or for me, I live by myself, but I guess I'm the head of my household. To say that the rules that I make, because people can come to my house and visit, and I can make rules for how they have to behave in my house. I don't think anyone ever questions that. But to say that's proportional, the rules I make to visitors in my house is proportional to the rules that the government makes for me, that's absurd. No one would ever, I mean, people try to make that comparison.
Right, because
it's false.
I mean, we go to who owns the property, right? I mean,
exactly.
We don't want to take it off the rails too far, but you're the property owner. Just because someone got elected doesn't give him a right to your property because your neighbors decided to vote for him doesn't mean he can now make rules on your property. Philosophically speaking, I realize in reality they do that, but
to say, I mean, to say that the state or the family is a government, I mean, that's begging the question about property rights and a lot of stuff like that, where it's like, you really believe that, or is it just kind of like a convenient?
Right. I mean,
he's
clearly conflating rules with government. He says family has a government. Well, as far as I know, and and every family I've known has never held elections to get dad out of the house and put big brother in. But I don't know how you compare family to government unless you're saying rules are government. He says if it doesn't, it has unspoken rules. He says, this is a quote, family has a government. If it doesn't, it has unspoken rules. So what's he talking about? He's obviously conflating rules with government.
Right.
Because he's saying if there aren't stated rules, then there's unspoken rules.
Yeah.
If it doesn't have a government, then it has unspoken rules. What are you talking? He's not making any sense. And he clearly has no clue about anything that has to do with capitalism.
Right.
Period.
And let's take it a step back and just mention, we can't get rid of government because government is just an expression of the necessity for groups of people to reach a consensus about how they're going to behave. So when Dave Rubin and Jordan Peterson were figuring out how to organize and schedule their interview for that show, they became a government.
I guess so, according to Jordan Peterson.
Like you go into a grocery store and you wait in line and then you pay for your things. You followed the rules that they had there. The grocery store is a government because there was a set of rules for how to, and everyone generally agrees to all these rules on how to act. So therefore, that's a government. No, it's absurd. People voluntarily interact all the time. It's unfortunate.
Yeah. So moving on, it's actually funny because he just misses it here. Yeah, that's an absurd. I mean, if his definition of government is rules, then okay. Well, everyone needs rules. There has to be rules. It's how we set them. And I think property rights are a better way to do it than forcing government on everybody. But then he says here, if it doesn't, it has unspoken rules and there's a ritual. So if there's no government, it's ritual. Well, there it is. I mean, you said it. So, I guess that was a good line. But I don't think that's the point he was trying to make. And he says, but families are actually better when some of the government governing principles are articulated. I'm guessing government was misspeaking there, and he said when some of the governing principles are articulated. I mean, I don't think I really disagree. Families have rules generally. I mean, are there families without rules? Maybe.
The one, I mean, in my house, there is only one rule. There are no rules.
Yeah, exactly. It was a wild and crazy time over there. Okay.
I mean,
so
all he's saying, I mean, again, it's the conflation of government and rules.
Rules with government.
Yeah,
Exactly.
it's good to be able to have some explicit rules, and that's
it's also kind of
along, but that's fine. I mean, like I said, you can come into my house and I could tell you, you're not allowed to wear orange shirts in my house.
But generally, like, say I walked in your house with my shoes on and you like a clean floor and don't want people wearing shoes. I mean, if I walked in and walked into your kitchen and you said, whoa, could you mind taking them off? I just cleaned the floor or something. Yeah, sure. No problem. But it wouldn't be, no, ignorance is not an excuse. Go in my basement for 3 months until you pay me $500 and I'll let you out. And if you do anything in the next 2 years, I'll put you back in my basement. I mean,
well, I'm not going to ever show you my basement then.
Yeah, well, so you might have, well, whatever. We're not going to go there.
Wasn't for dirty floors, though.
All right, so anyway, I'll continue with his answer. To get to the proper place usually means to balance a number of competing forces. It isn't like, well, no government and everything will be okay. It's like, no, sorry, it isn't that simple. Nothing is that simple, and that's why I'm not a fan of ideologues. All right. What do you think of that little line there?
Well, I don't know anyone, and I think we're kind of talking about before we went on, that, from a lot of anarchists and libertarians, you hear them say, and I know I say, like, I don't want a government. I think that the state should not exist. And people take that as me saying that I believe that there's that the government could not be there tomorrow and everything would just be fine in anarchy. I mean, I think these things take time. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to constantly advocate. I do advocate for the government to disappear tomorrow, but it's not going to. So we're, taking steps in the meantime to try to make it obsolete. So
have you ever read Man, Economy, and State?
Just some of it, just the beginning.
Okay, so you got to the part where
I read about 250 pages, so the first 1% of it.
Right. So then you must have read, because I'll summarize it up for you. No government and everything will be okay. That's what he's talking about in 1,300 pages.
Right.
I mean, like, what I want to say to Jordan Peterson is it's like, no, like, sorry, like, it isn't that simple. And that's not what any anarcho-capitalist argues. Nobody says no government and everything will be okay. I've never heard that from any of them. The only problem is government. If we just get rid of it, everyone will be happy and everything will be wonderful. Nobody says that. Nobody argues for that.
Right, because every libertarian who said that they don't want the state get that response back. Like, oh, what about this? What about this? What about this? So that's why, if you actually ask us, we can explain how each of these services or products that the government provides would be handled better by the market.
Right. Not perfectly, not rainbows and unicorns and everyone's happy all the time. Yes, we're human beings. Human beings do bad things. We just think it'll be better.
Exactly.
With a lot less violence.
Right. Like how it's kind of funny. Well, how are you going to prevent someone from stealing all your money? Well, let's start by not having it institutionalized that someone's stealing my money.
Yeah, that's one place we can start. We can drop theft big time by just eliminating government. Theft will go down. I mean, it'll be insane how if you compare theft to a government society versus an anarcho-capitalist society, theft will be very small.
Oh yeah.
So anyway, then he goes on. Nothing is that simple, and that's why I'm not a fan of ideologues. It's like ideologues have the same answer to every question. It's like, well, that's the same as not thinking. End quote. Do you have any issue with that? You agree? You on board?
No, because well, one, I don't understand the problem people have with ideologues because I don't know. I think it's important to be consistent on what you believe. You know, thinking something without thinking it through or blindly is a bad thing. And I know. I mean, I hope I'm not guilty of it now. I think I've done. I know I used to. I used to not know why I believed the things I did, but it took a lot of thinking and discussions with people to kind of come to where I am now. And I'm still, making sure I'm keeping an open mind and learning. But what's kind of funny is that, well, he's kind of contradicting himself because his position is that the state is necessary. He's not coming at the idea of anarcho-capitalism as agnostic, saying like, well, actually, I don't really know. I mean, I don't think we could do without a state. He's saying, no, you need it. So doesn't that make him ideologically supporting the existence of the state? Doesn't mean it's the way his idea or version of the state would be the way it is today. I'm sure it would be vastly different what he would want, but still, I mean, it's funny that we get critiqued as being ideologues when that's exactly what they're doing by just
right. And I don't know who he's talking. Like, he may have someone in mind, and like you said, there's some people who believe things without knowing, and maybe people do have the same answer to every question. I don't know, and that would be the same as not thinking. If you don't consider other sides, and that's just I'm this, and this is what I'm doing, and this is my answer to everything. Well, then yeah, that's the same as not thinking. But I challenge you to find an ANCAP who wasn't a Democrat or a Republican before they became an ANCAP. And if that's the case, then they clearly did some thinking. Anyone who changes their mind, even if they change their mind to something I disagree with, did some thinking. You don't just wake up and change. Mm-hmm. So, and I think a lot of ideologues do think. We were talking before we went on air. I got to be careful how I say this, but I'd much rather talk to a communist who really understands the communist theory and try to back them into a corner than to talk to someone who has no clue and just says, hey, I like Republicans sometimes and Democrats sometimes. And, you don't get anywhere, and those conversations are boring.
Oh, yeah, I agree.
All right, so I'll continue with Peterson's answer. Generally, it turns out that things are very, very complicated, and you have to take them apart in detail, and then you have to solve a small part of the problem, and that's hard. It's like everything is like fixing a military helicopter. There's lots of parts, and you don't understand most of them, and you'll make it worse if you don't know what you're doing. And so those movements, like anarchists or progressives, it's like, no, it's too complicated. Well, Jordan, Dr. Peterson, you just explained why we need anarchism, because no one person or group of people can possibly understand how to manage an economy. And that's the knowledge problem. That was F.A. Hayek's knowledge problem, right? No one person can possibly understand how to fix everything. And that's why you need the market. Yeah. So I thought he did a great job of explaining why we need anarchy. And then he goes on to say, those movements like anarchists or progressives, it's too complicated. So it's too complicated to have anarchy. So you need one person doing everything, fixing the military helicopters, he says. Do you have anything to add on that one? Yeah.
Well, I mean, my biggest issue is he says it's like fixing a military helicopter. I think it's more closely related to fixing a tractor. But I guess that's just a matter of preference.
Yeah, I was gonna see how long I could let the silence go and see where you take the tractor analogy, but yeah, it could be like fixing a tractor. I guess no one person can do that.
But I saw something the other day, like what you just said with the Hayek thing with the fatal conceit. I saw someone the other day, I forget who it was, but they were talking about, it might have been Bob Murphy. I don't know. So I was listening to something about saying what we need to do to fix the healthcare problem is to get and I forget which politicians they named. You know, the leading Democrat and the leading Republican, just put them in a room together and they'll figure out what to do. And it's like, really? So why not like have them solve all of the world's problems if they could just get like a couple of
two career politicians, put
right.
them in a room. They know about the healthcare system.
Technical problem for some industry and be like, oh yeah, they'll figure it out. What? That's absurd.
Wait, did you say Bob Murphy said that?
He was criticizing someone saying that and saying like, and then saying, you know, why not have him do anything? Like figure out how to get food everywhere.
Right.
Also, speaking of Bob Murphy, yeah, he obviously listens to us, specifically me, because in a recent episode on the Tom Woods show, he brought up tractors and manufacturing them. So there's only one way. There's only one way he could have thought of that.
Yeah. So thanks, Bob, for listening. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
So let's continue on. Ruben then cuts it, unless you had something else to add. Okay. No. So Ruben cuts in and says, yeah, it's interesting because I've had a couple ANCAPs on here. Intellectually, I love the exercise of how much we could chop away from the government. But for me, at least, as someone who believes we have to have some level of government, the chaos that we would go through and the pain and probably bloodshed and God knows what else just wouldn't be worth even getting there. But I like the idea. End quote. Anything to say on Ruben's reply?
He's an ideologue.
Yeah, he is.
We have to have some level of government. But anyway, again, with the chaos, what do you think the bloodshed? All right, let's say there's going to be. I don't understand. Well, again, it's just not understanding what most anarchists say. I think a lot of us. There's basically two main schools of thought in the anarchist movement that I'm aware of, and if I'm wrong on this, please someone correct me if there's another one. But there's the secessionists and the abolitionists. Neither of them are talking about having like a armed revolution. The secessionists believe that, you know, that you break away, form smaller governments and everything, and eventually it's down to the individual. The abolitionists say just work to get rid of everything, make the state obsolete. And, you know, the abolitionists are more likely to be agorists too. So either way, you know, through either of those means, there could be bloodshed through it, but it's not like they're by no means given. I think both of them intend to do it peacefully. And even if there were some bloodshed, you know, you're going to say that's unacceptable, but like all the bloodshed currently from the state now is like...
yeah, I was going to say Ruben might be living in the same world as the person who asked the question, because Dave Rubin, who in the 20th century do you think was responsible for just a little bit of bloodshed, like 100 million people dead more at the hands of governments?
The ANCAPs.
Like the problem with the 20th century. Yeah, exactly. The problem with this 20th century wasn't all these anarchists. The problem in the Middle East isn't because there's a whole bunch of anarchists running around trying to have a voluntary society.
The dude that shot the Archduke Ferdinand was an anarchist, wasn't he? Checkmate.
That's what they say. Yeah. So then remember all the anarchists from Austria-Hungary and Serbia and Russia and France and Germany. All those anarchists got together and had a big war. And then in the 40s and 30s, all those anarchists in Germany put all those people into camps, and it was just a mess of anarchy in the 20th century. But I mean, open your eyes.
Yeah. It's
like who is really responsible for bloodshed? And if you're so against bloodshed, great, hop on board, come with us.
Right, and again, that's
there'll
not
be a
to
lot
say
less bloodshed.
That's not to say that David Rubin's version of government would be what it is now, but. I mean,
I don't think it would be.
No, it's.
I mean, I listen to it. I'm not like a religious listener, but yeah, I like his show. I enjoy his show.
From what I've heard of him, he's 99% better than most people on what his views are.
Anyone you're going to watch on cable news, yeah,
right.
I mean, the point of this episode isn't to trash these two people because I actually really enjoy listening to both of them.
Right.
But it's just infuriating when you make claims like this and have no idea what you're talking about.
I mean, what would be, and let's just assume that both of them are kind of, well, I don't know. I don't want to put words in Peterson's mouth, but I know Rubin, I mean, he calls himself a classical liberal, and from everything I've heard, it seems like he's kind of a minarchist, the night watchman state, protecting property rights and,
he's big on civil liberties. Yeah.
Right. So why would there be like making that just like a police? Why would there necessarily be a huge amount of bloodshed between that night watchman state and just privatizing that kind of stuff? I guess they'll say like, oh, it's going to be warlords and everything, but I would like it if someone could articulate that a little bit. I don't know.
Right. So, well,
it's just a throwaway thing because you can peek. It's cheap. What's frustrating about it is it's just a cheap kind of a cheap shot because people associate anarchy with chaos. Like they conflate the two terms. They say anarchy is chaos. So to be like, oh yeah, it's gonna be bloodshed. People, yeah, it's because it's chaos. Well, no. I mean,
just like they conflate like society and order as government, which is the exact opposite of that. It's mass theft and violence.
It's like
it is the warlords taking over.
It's like throw us a bone here. You said you've had a couple of ANCAPs on the show, and I know he's had Brian Kaplan on. It's like anything that those guys because he
obviously I would say yes because he does say he likes the intellectual exercise or whatever, and he says it's interesting, and so I mean he probably hasn't given it a lot of thought. I mean maybe he has. That's not fair, but he probably didn't read through Rothbard and Mises, or maybe he has. I don't know. I don't know what he does. He's a smart guy, and his show is really good.
Yeah,
but it's obviously not. He's not an ANCAP. I don't know that doesn't necessarily mean that he doesn't know anything about it, but he does say he's had ANCAPs on and they were very interesting and he liked that and loves the exercise, but he can't get over the hump or whatever. So fine. I don't really have a problem so much with Rubin saying that as much as I wish Jordan Peterson would have said, well, I know nothing about anarcho-capitalism. I haven't even heard that term before, instead of acting like because exactly what he just explained is what anarchists are saying is no one person can know everything. Jordan knows everything about psychology. He's unbelievable. He can quote guys. He's very good at speaking. If you YouTube him, you can watch his stuff. It's great, but he doesn't know everything, and you can't know everything. He can't focus on economics and philosophy if he's focusing on psychology. You can only do so much. You can't fix the entire military helicopter. You have to take a small part. And that's the whole thing of anarchy, is have people specialize in what they're good at instead of having a group of people or one person try to make the decisions for everybody.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and I agree too. I should have been a little lighter on Rubin because I don't listen, and because I know of Jordan Peterson. I listened to him a little bit, but I don't. Not like you have. So I know what Rubin thinks a lot more than Peterson. So I should have thrown him a bone, I guess, instead of begging he throws me one.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, anyway, it continues if we should go on real quick.
It does.
Peterson says it does just a little bit.
Peterson says,
yeah. Do you want to read that part or?
I mean, I don't.
We don't have to.
Yeah.
He basically just says, because he makes a good point, and let's give him
oh yeah, I just don't have it on
say something nice about him.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll say something real nice about him real quick. Okay. But Peterson says, well, it's necessary to figure out how to limit the growth of anything that has the proclivity to grow. I'm not a fan of bigness. There's this idea, especially around 2008, of too big to fail. I think all the bloody phrases that have ever been coined, that has to be one that is nearest to the stupidest, because the actual, in my opinion, the proper viewpoint on that is that it's so big it has to fail. And so this is one of the things I think could actually unite conservatives and liberals, conservatives and leftists even. Like some leftists don't like big companies and conservatives don't like big government. It's like, okay, there's something in common here. Big. Well, big's a problem. So, we'll leave it at that.
We'll leave it at that.
I agree with you.
That's where I stopped transcribing.
Well, yeah, well, actually, it does continue to go on because he talks about Brexit and European
okay.
economic community was too big.
It
And
was a couple. It was a couple sentences after that because I think
yes,
I might have been like mid sentence that I stopped too.
You did, but but I agree, and he makes a good point. So at least he's not a big government guy, and when something is so big, maybe it should fail instead of propping it up and making it even bigger.
Right.
Which is what happens when a few people try to fix the military helicopter. They make big things that should fail bigger. So if we just let it fail and let people decide through their voluntary interactions, we'd be much better off. So I think actually, now that I read these quotes, it sounds like Jordan Peterson is an anarchist because he talks about ritual taking over for government and that things are so complicated that no one person could do it. So there we go. We got him.
There we go. Got another one. You can thank us. Doctor, he's a doctor, right?
Oh, yeah.
Dr. Peterson.
Dr. Peterson. And so, yeah, and I just want to emphasize it even more. I really like both these guys. I listen to their podcasts. I think they're awesome. It's just...
Yeah, and it's one of those things where, because I know the response to something like this would be, well, you know, okay, so Jordan Peterson's not an anarchist. Give him a break. He does a bunch of other great stuff. I agree. He does. He is. You know, the fact that how he's standing up to the, you know, the militant, politically correct culture is very admirable. And
But he even says really, it's not like the guy. What was his name? The guy who got kicked out of everything from Brexit. Not Brexit. Breitbart.
Milo Yiannopoulos.
Milo Yiannopoulos. Yeah, like he's obnoxious and offensive. Jordan Peterson is not. Jordan Peterson is fantastic.
Yeah. So I know people, you know, people might say like, oh, you should just leave him alone and everything. But I mean, I don't know. I think that eventually defeating the state's important. And if he's going to be wrong about something, you know, I think we should bring it up and talk about it. And
right.
Because the last thing, intellectualism and thinking dies when you don't question or don't push back
absolutely
at the authorities. So if you disagree,
right, and he's, you know, yeah, he comes across as like being intellectually elitist. That's probably not fair, but it's like you ask a smart guy, because he is a smart guy, you ask him a question, he has to have an answer. He can't say, I don't know.
Right.
You know, he couldn't say, I'm not familiar with this, because by his answer, he clearly illustrated that he's not familiar with anarcho-capitalism. He didn't say anything close to what it is. So he obviously doesn't know it. So instead of saying, I'm not real familiar with that, it's not something I go into, but my immediate thought is we've had government for 10,000 years and people would go into chaos without it, because that is kind of like what he talks about with the family structure and things. He's like, you know, humans were built on 10,000 years of this. You can't just change it overnight. It won't work. You'll be thrust into chaos. So it wouldn't shock me if his answer is, we've had government for so long, we can't end it. There's certain things, you know, and whatever, but he doesn't know the theory of anarcho-capitalism because he didn't address anything that anarcho-capitalists say. So I wish he just would have said he didn't know much about it. And then I wouldn't have really had a problem with his answer. I mean, I would have, but it would have been less infuriating.
Yeah. So maybe use this as not so much, because like we said, he's a really smart guy. So this is probably going to, from someone who doesn't know anything about anarcho-capitalism, it's probably going to be one of the better kind of responses that someone would give, as opposed to your everyday Joe. So
yeah,
you know, maybe use what we say as ammo for when you hear it from someone that's not as smart as Jordan Peterson, or if they are as smart as Jordan Peterson, because I think we can. Yeah,
anyone.
Yeah. So with that, do you have a free market success story?
I could. Do you have one? Do you think of anything?
Nope.
Okay. So I was on Twitter at one point today and saw someone tweeted out the cover of Forbes magazine from 2007, November 12th, 2007, almost 1 year ago today. Today's the 13th. And it has a picture of a guy on a cell phone. He's in his business suit and says, Nokia, 1 billion customers. Can anyone catch the cell phone king? How many people listening have a Nokia? Probably close to zero. I did have a Nokia at one time, and I used to play Snake on it, and it was great.
I also have Nokias in my garage.
Unfortunately, I got that joke, but
I knew you would.
Yeah. So anyway, back on. I found the article from 2007, and it talks about how the dominance has been good lately to Nokia. The Helsinki, Finland firm will sell 430 million handsets this year, equal to the combined volume of Motorola, Samsung, and Sony Ericsson. Its revenue will grow by 30% to 76 billion, with profits probably up 1 quarter to 7.8 billion. Anyway, the point of me bringing this up is they don't even mention Apple. Apple came out with the iPhone in 2007. I don't think. No, BlackBerry was done by Qualcomm, right? Who made Blackberries?
The Canadian dude.
Well, they were popular in 2007, but nobody has a BlackBerry today. Maybe someone does. Maybe they make phones. I don't know. They're not. Nobody has them. Motorola, I guess they came out with a new phone. Samsung certainly has phones, but I haven't seen a Nokia phone in forever. And this is just 10 years ago, talking about the dominance and how big this is and how its combined sales are going to equal Motorola, Samsung, and Sony. And I'm sure all three of them are now way ahead of Nokia on phone sales. And not even mentioned is Apple. Who saw that coming?
Right.
This is Forbes magazine. This is legitimate. I mean, this is the real deal, real smart guys writing at Forbes. They didn't see it. They were talking about Nokia dominating the world of cell phones. And 10 years later, they're pretty much gone. No one could have predicted that. And I think we're probably all better off for it. So that's my free market. It's really not a success story so much for Nokia, but for the market it is. It's a good thing that Nokia wasn't a government-owned thing or whatever, that we had to use Nokia, that the market allowed innovation and new companies to come into the market because we're much better off for it.
Absolutely. So with that, show notes page again is mcfugel.com/65. You'll find the transcript of what we're talking about tonight between Jordan Peterson and Dave Rubin, as well as a link to that actual episode, so you can listen to the whole thing, as well as just the Rubin report. You can check that out if you want. Also, you'll find links to liking us on Facebook.
Totally.
Yeah. Following us on Twitter, and there's a couple other social media things in there, as well as subscribing to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher, as well as subscribing to our email list. So thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next week.
Peace.